our second speaker is Lucía D'Arino. Lucía is working with the World Federation of Deaf and Blind. She's the program advisor, and she has been the focal point within the SHAPES project. And Lucía is a very strong advocate for inclusion of underrepresented groups. She's based in Spain, and she has been developing a real extended expertise on the topic, and she will bring us her perspective, working in SHAPES, presenting a little bit what are also the lessons learned and key recommendations coming from the project. Lucía, the floor is yours.
My name is Lucía D'Arino, and I currently work as program advisor at the World Federation of the Deafblind. And yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit about what does inclusiveness mean, how can we ensure that our work is inclusive and we're not leaving anybody behind. So just to provide a quick overview of disability, so 15% of the world's population has a disability, and that is equal to 1 billion people in the world. So a key tool that often we refer to when we talk about inclusion and accessibility and disability is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, also known as the CRPD. The EU has ratified this convention as well as all of the EU countries. And it has very interesting articles, which I really invite you to check out if you haven't already. And some that are relevant to today's discussion is Article 5 on equality and non-discrimination, Article 9 on accessibility, and Article 19 on living independently and inclusion in the community. So a part of the CRPD, we also have EU policy and legislation, including standards that ensure that the rights of persons with disabilities are respected, and also that we engage in practices that are non-discriminatory. So what is the situation of persons with deafblindness? So as I mentioned, I specifically represent a group, a distinct disability group, which is called deafblindness. And there's a lot of misconceptions around this disability, but mainly persons with deafblindness have in common that they have both a hearing and a vision impairment. So it's a combined impairment, and persons with deafblindness represent around 0.2 to 2% of the population. So another common misconception is believing that persons with deafblindness are completely deaf and completely blind, but this is not always the case. Many might have a little sight and or hearing that they can use. Others can be completely deaf, but they have residual vision, or the other way around. So another important aspect when we talk about deafblindness is that there's a wide diversity. So every person with deafblindness can connect differently with the world, can have a different communication system. So some persons with deafblindness might use sign language to communicate, others might use tactile sign language, etc. So like there's really a variety. And often the services that persons with deafblindness are offered are a combination of services that's designed for people that are blind or deaf. But it's important to understand that the service must meet individual needs, and they shouldn't be a combination of these services. So just to provide an example, within the SHAPES project, which I will discuss in the next slide, but different digital solutions were developed, and the developers would come to us and would say, listen, I think our app would be accessible to a person with deafblindness. And I'd ask, why do you think that is? And they'd say, oh, because we think it's accessible for people that are blind, and we think that it's accessible for people that are deaf. And then obviously when we started, doing our research, we realized that it wasn't, because it was not, person with deafblindness hadn't tested it, and their needs are very specific. So again, we need to think a little bit outside the box. And another key aspect is that deafblindness is more common among older age groups, and the prevalence increases by 6%, which takes me to my next slide, which is the SHAPES project. So currently WFDB, our organization, is one of the consortium partners of the SHAPES project, and we have become an important partner because we really have an oversight of accessibility and inclusion. And I think partners really trust us in that sense and really count on our opinion in terms of inclusion and accessibility. So in case you don't know the SHAPES project, it's a 4-year project that was launched in 2019, and it will end in October this year. So we're really in the final stages of the project. It's a European Union's Horizon 2020 program, and it currently involves it involves 14 countries and more than 2,000 older individuals. So it basically aims to address the needs and the expectations of older adults, making sure that they can live more independently, they can age in a healthy and active way. It improves care system networks, and just in general making sure that technology and digital solutions can improve their life or maintain a good quality of life. And one of its key elements is to integrate accessible technology. So really trying to make sure that the platform that will come out of this project and the digital solutions, which are 15, are accessible or as accessible as possible for persons with disabilities and everybody in general. So the project is composed by a consortium of 36 organizations, and the leading organization is Maynooth University in Ireland. And I would say that SHAPES could be used as an example of a good practice because it really mainstreams disability in its activities. And I will explain a little bit in the next slide. So when I say that SHAPES could be an example of a good practice, I have put together a couple of reasons. The first one is that 2 disability organizations are consortium partners. So this is WFDB, our organization, and another organization called EUD, the European Union of the Deaf. So our organizations, they're both organizations of and by persons with disabilities. So that means that we can maintain our ownership, and we can really make sure that we are meaningfully contributing, and we're really bringing the expertise of people that live with this disability. Another key point, WFDB was involved from early planning stages. So right from where there was this project proposal to be presented to the Commission, WFDB was involved. And that is really key because often we involve organizations of persons with deafblindness or civil society or organizations of persons with disabilities in general at later stages. And we can really see the impact and how inclusion is not really achieved. Another key point is that reasonable accommodation is reflected in the budget. So this means that in order for people or organizations or staff to actively participate and to contribute meaningfully, they will need some adjustments to be made. And this is reflected in the budget. For example, if a staff member or if end users need sign language interpreters, that has been reflected already in the budget from the beginning. So we're really not struggling or sacrificing activities because we need this money that goes towards accessibility. No, this has already been taken into consideration right from the beginning, and that is really key. Another important aspect, accessibility meetings are often held. So often relevant partners will come together and we will discuss how can we make sure that this project is more accessible, where are we failing, what are the barriers, etc. That's really key. And then another important aspect is that inclusion and accessibility has been adopted as a cross-cutting requirement. So really when we talk about accessibility or when we talk about inclusion, we really refer to the whole project. So like all of the work packages, all of the tasks, the deliverables, etc. So we don't only base it on activities where our organization is involved at, for example. It's really something that has been mainstreamed. So more reasons for why SHAPES is an example of a good practice. And one of the big reasons for us to be involved is that WFDB could maintain its ownership and decision-making power. So this means that any relevant decisions or any relevant processes, persons with deafblindness are actively involved in it. So not only at staff level, but our board, they really have a saying, and we can really kind of shape how we are involved in the project. Also, the Shapes has provided an excellent platform to connect the disability community with other stakeholders around the EU. And a very good example is this webinar. So being able to connect with other stakeholders and discuss topics related to disability and inclusion. So again, we have the direct involvement and participation of end users with different types of disabilities. So deafblindness, deaf end users, wheelchair users, other users with reduced mobility. So it has really been interesting to bring together different types of disabilities and really see how that impacts or not the activities. And then increase awareness on disability, inclusion, and accessibility, not only within Shapes, but also externally. So I would say that our partners have really learned about disability, inclusive language. These were new terms to many of them. So I think we really have made a good job at increasing awareness. And then last but not least, we have collected data. So this is really key. So we have been able to collect information on our side on all the persons with deafblindness, but generally within the project, we have really gathered information about inclusion and how older persons are included or not within society and what hinders them from being included. So just some quick examples of how we've contributed. So we were involved in the creation of Persona 8. So this is a fictitious character, and they represent an older person with deafblindness, more concretely a man from Norway. So we really picked some accessibility requirements, and we kind of designed this fictitious profile. So then developers and pilot leaders could understand that this specific person could be representative of many other people with deafblindness, and that, you know, if your product or if your process is not inclusive through these personas, then it means it's not inclusive at all. So another thing that we've done is that we often produce internal accessibility reports. So I would kind of put together some feedback and I would share it. So this could be, for example, during an event, if I realized that there are practices that are not accessible or that could be improved, I would put them together and we would share them. So this has been a good way because, you know, we have a record of what things work and what things should be improved. And I think it's a useful tool. Another important aspect is that I'm often sharing key resources to inclusion and accessibility checklists. It can be a checklist for an event. It can be a checklist for selecting speakers. So really kind of putting together useful resources where you can really, on practical terms, make sure you're inclusive. And then another important aspect is that the deliverable review template that we had within Shapes that is used when we submit a deliverable to the European Commission really didn't include any aspect related to accessibility and inclusion. So what we did is that we grabbed the deliverable review template and we included a section only on accessibility and inclusion. So for example, have you made sure that your deliverable includes alternative text? Have you made sure that your deliverable does not include offensive or discriminatory language? So really making sure that the way we refer to when we talk about people with disabilities or older persons is not stigmatizing. For example, referring to them as vulnerable or weak, or, you know, really kind of maintaining some stereotypes around these two groups was really something that we were trying to avoid. Also, WFDB has been involved in the testing of the platform, so making sure it's accessible, for instance, to screen reader users, the color contrast is good enough, etc. And the same goes with the digital solutions. So we've had persons with deafblindness, older persons with deafblindness around the world testing these digital solutions and providing their feedback. And then we've organized different consultations just to make sure that, our involvement in shapes is accurate and it's in line with the expectations of our board, for example. And this has been in the form of interviews or focus groups. We've also had a person with deafblindness involved in the dialogue workshops as a moderators, as speakers, really kind of, breaking with a lot of stigma that persons with deafblindness or persons with disabilities are limited in their capacity, or, they're not independent enough, etc. So what are the general barriers? So I would say the general barriers to inclusion are attitudinal barriers. So this can be ageism, ableism, racism. So any form of discrimination is really a great barrier to inclusion. Again, lack of awareness. So not knowing what inclusion means, what's discrimination, what's underrepresented groups. Another barrier could be lack of public funding and programs that ensure inclusion and that measure it. So there might be some projects that really do not include the component of inclusion, and there's no way of measuring if a project is inclusive or not. Lack of consultations and involvement of civil society, and here I'm not only talking about people with disabilities, but any other representative organization. Do they have a seat at the table? Are they able to? Do they have a voice? Can they provide feedback? There's little to no information or resources in accessible and easy to understand formats. So really a lot of information that we're putting out there, many people cannot access it because it's not accessible. And maybe an example could be this webinar. We do not have an international sign interpreter. So for people that have a hearing impairment, that this could be useful. I know that the organization, the team and the colleagues that have been organizing the event really tried to make sure that there was one or two actually, but that hasn't been the case. So that means that, we're leaving out a lot of people that cannot access this webinar, for example. So really trying to think, how can we make our event more accessible, for instance? Can we involve an organization of persons with disability like us from the organizational? Can we make sure that, we include this in the budget, etc. And then another issue is that policies and schemes do not often mainstream disability. So really disability is seen as this only component that stands by itself. But really we should understand disability or inclusion as a cross-cutting issue. So for example, a policy or a scheme might target specifically older adults and then specifically persons with disabilities, but there wouldn't be a connection. What about older people that have a disability? So really trying to kind of understand this as more of a mainstreaming exercise. So what are the barriers that we have encountered within the Shapes project? So specifically within this context, and this is like our organization's view as well. But when we started working for the Shapes project, we realized that many partners lack disability awareness and inclusiveness. So really they had no exposure to disability. They had no exposure to how to be inclusive. So this was like a really new thing for them. So we really had to start from scratch. This is a consequence of my next point, which is lack of accessible resources. So promotional materials were coming out for the Shapes project, events, deliverables, etc. And we were realizing that they were not accessible. And there wasn't an inclusive language either. So that was a really big issue that we saw there. So we were using colleagues or partners were using stigmatizing language just because they didn't know. It was a lack of awareness, really. Another issue was the lack of involvement from the beginning in some processes. So like, for instance, we would be involved in the organization of a workshop a week before it was going to be held. So obviously we were trying to make this workshop accessible. It's really hard to do it a week in advance. The same with digital solutions. We would be consulted on when the digital solution was already pretty much developed and we weren't involved at early stages. So really, it would make everything a lot harder going back to your digital solutions and changing a lot of things that were set right from the beginning. Another issue is that because the Shapes project is quite a big project and there are many activities going on and processes and deliverables being submitted, it has sometimes been a little hard to be involved in every process logically, because we can't be everywhere. So it was sometimes a pity to learn that, oh, we missed this one, or we should have been involved in this one. And we also saw a bit of a lack of initiative from partners, especially at the beginning. So they wouldn't reach out to us. They would just go ahead with whatever activity they had planned, and then they would realize, oh, actually, this was inaccessible. So I must say that has changed a lot, and I don't think it's the case anymore as much. Partners really see us as a key partner, and they really involve us in main processes. And then another barrier is that not all components of shapes are currently accessible, and we need to be realistic. Past deliverables are not accessible. Not all of the digital solutions are accessible because not all of them have been tested by all of the groups of persons with disabilities. So it is a reality. And then, as I mentioned earlier, accessibility is often something that we think about after. So this is becoming less and less the case, I must say, but it never harms to just, quickly remind our partners every now and then, hey, we're here, involve us. Please make sure that accessibility is something you're bearing in mind. So just my last two slides, what are your general recommendations? So we've talked about the barriers, what can we do? So these are I would say, our top recommendations. So first of all, collaborate with civil society and representative organizations from the beginning. So whatever activity you're doing, just make sure you reach out to an organization. If you don't have a partner that has expertise in accessibility, you can reach out, I'm sure, to other partners, other organizations, and just make sure that they have a say. Perhaps within a project's framework, create a work package that focuses on inclusion or a task, and make sure there's a way you can measure progress. I encourage partnerships between government or private sector with civil society. So really strengthen and share this knowledge and mutual learning. Do not leave underrepresented groups behind. So who do you refer to when you're talking about underrepresented groups? We're talking about groups that are less visible in society. That can be persons with disabilities, older persons, persons with the LGBTQ community, persons from an ethnic minority. So really thinking, outside of the norm, I would say, and who could we bring to the table? Who are we leaving behind? And then adopt an intersectional approach. Intersectional approach is that you're really understanding that humans are multi-layered, they're complex, and if you grab a person with a disability, they're more likely to be exposed to intersectional discrimination. That means that they might not only be disabled, they might also be a person, from an ethnic minority. Is this person a woman? Is this person, exposed to another type of multiple or another type of discrimination? So really, trying to understand that people might be discriminated against for several reasons. And, the more we understand that we're leaving people behind, often the better we will do. And then, try to bring to the table people that are less privileged groups. So this could be older people, that they are less likely to be a speaker at a panel, or people with disabilities, or people from an ethnic minority, etc. So really make sure that we're bringing them to the table, they're empowered, and they are involved in decision making, not only, performative, inviting people from underrepresented groups as a performative act, but really is an impactful activity, because we know that all groups in society have a lot to bring to the table. And then my last slide, what are my general recommendations for organizations, or for you if you're listening to my presentation? First of all, listen to different civil society group, listen to different voices, and educate yourself and your team. I think we all have the responsibility to kind of go out there, and luckily we have internet, we have a lot of resources and information out there. How can we be inclusive? What are we doing wrong? How can we improve? Fund trainings with experts, obviously paid trainings, but pay experts that can teach you about inclusion, teach your staff, your members, your managers, your board, etc. So really make sure that this is something that you are prioritizing financially. Then try to seek feedback from your staff or from different events. Was this event accessible? What could we have done differently? And make sure you have a way of measuring the progress on inclusion. Then another useful tip is to select a focal point. on inclusion or accessibility, or an inclusion council. So if it's within a project, maybe a specific organization, or if it's within your organization, maybe set a specific department or a specific group. So really try to set somebody that could be, you know, responsible or kind of leading the way. And then allocate resources and the budget to ensure inclusion. So in order for inclusion to be on the table, often you need the financial resources for that. So make sure that when you're planning, when you're, you know, budgeting, to have allocated budget towards inclusion. And then collect disaggregated data. Without data, it's really hard to know where the gaps are and where the barriers are. So make sure that, you know, something as simple as an event, you can, after an event, you can send a link and then try to disaggregate collected data. So who attended the webinar? Was there anybody with a disability? Was there anybody from an ethnic minority? What was the age? So really trying to collect disaggregated data. And the last point, which I think is important, inclusion and accessibility is a shared responsibility. So not only organizations of persons with disabilities are responsible for it, I think we all are, and we all have the duty to make sure that our work is responsible and accessible and inclusive and ethic. So really think of it as, you know, it's our responsibility, and we share this responsibility. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any specific questions, I'm happy to answer. My contact details are on the screen, but my email is projects@wfdb.eu if you want to reach out to me, if you have any questions on accessibility, and happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Lucia. And again,